Hi, good morning everyone. Welcome to our weekly edition of Tuesday Temple Takeaway. And we continue looking at the life of Peter. And today we're going to change direction slightly because we move from the Gospels, where we've looked at Peter for the last number of weeks as a follower of Christ, as a leader of the 12. We're now going to move into the Acts of the Apostles, and we're about to see a very different Peter to the one that we see in the Gospels. And so this new Peter is emerging after he was wonderfully forgiven and restored by Jesus. A new Peter comes to the fore. And we pick up the story where Jesus has just ascended back to his Father in Acts chapter. The incident is recorded in Acts chapter 1, and the small band of followers that are left see him go away, and their instruction, their command was to go back into Jerusalem and wait for the promise of the Father, which of course was the coming of the Holy Spirit. So they do that. They make their way back to Jerusalem, to the upper room, to pray and just to share together. And during that time, it's recorded in Acts chapter 1 that an opportunity arose for Peter to stand up and gave a speech. So it's almost like a miniature sermon that he gives in Acts chapter 1. You'll read it from verse 16 to verse 22. And it's interesting that no sooner had Jesus exited, he ascended, that Peter jumps right in. And Peter steps forward and sees an opportunity, sees a space for leadership, and he jumps right in. And so there's nothing new there, because that's what he did in the Gospels, as you know, and where he had been the spokesman throughout. And here he is again. He's the spokesman again for the apostles. He's just continuing where he's left off, I guess. And in those few verses, he talks about the treachery of Judas. And of course, he encourages the disciples to appoint a replacement for Judas. He also, with real apostolic insight and authority, interprets a couple of psalms that he quotes in this little speech, this little talk that he gives. And then we move into chapter 2, where again he gives another sermon, and this time, of course, it's an altogether different setting for him. Acts chapter 2, a hugely significant chapter in the book of Acts, in the Bible, and the Holy Spirit has arrived, and they're all together in one place. They're all filled with the Spirit, and they began to speak in other tongues. There's lots of people in and around Jerusalem because of the feast, and they are somewhat confused and bewildered and perplexed by what they're seeing, and they can't really put a handle on what's going on. They're very bewildered by what they see. And again, there's a space. Peter, it says, stood up with the 11. And by now, of course, Matthias had become the replacement for Judas. And so he's with them, and Peter with this group of disciples, seeing the confusion and the bewilderment of people and all the phenomenon that was going on attached to Pentecost. He stands up. He takes an opportunity to give an explanation and expound what the scriptures say about it. So he takes it on himself to deliver a sermon, and what a masterpiece it is. Acts chapter 2, he takes 28 verses in the second chapter to deliver this sermon. The Holy Spirit had set the stage. The people are asking questions. The people are wanting answers. And the man of God, the apostolic leader, Peter, sees an opportunity to deliver an absolute masterpiece of a sermon. The opportunity presents itself, and Peter finds himself, you're on. You can imagine, you're on. It's now, Peter. No notes, probably. Just speaks freely from his heart. He probably hadn't prepared for it. He certainly didn't know that was going to happen that day. And but he delivers a wonderful sermon. And, his tongue would often get him into trouble, as we've seen in the Gospels. But here his words are truly inspired and are led by the Holy Spirit. And he gives an explanation. He expounds from the Old Testament what's happened. His sermon is centered mainly around Jesus, because the people would be aware of the events that had happened just a few weeks previous. And so he alludes to the death and the resurrection and the ascension of Jesus. Peter makes a powerful and a compelling witness to Christ as the promised Messiah. He goes back into the Old Testament to talk about Joel, who prophesied the coming of the Holy Spirit. I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. That was hundreds of years before. And of course, in the sermon, he says, this is that. This is what Joel had prophesied. This is what the Old Testament pointed forward to. And we have now moved, he's in essence, he's saying we've now moved into a whole new chapter of God's plan. You can imagine him, compelling the people to listen to him. Listen, people, I've got something I want to share with you. Something I want to tell you. Something amazing has happened. And Peter really understands the phenomenon of the Pentecostal visitation in a way probably that no one else had done. He has supernatural understanding. The Holy Spirit floods his mind with all that he has to say. It's interesting because, in the eyes of the Sanhedrin, in their view, Peter wasn't considered authorized to teach. He was uneducated. He wasn't from their school, from their university, and as far as they were concerned, he had no authority to teach. But yet, he delivers an amazing discourse on the phenomenon of Pentecost, and of course, also aligned to that, 7 weeks before this same man who stood up and delivers this sermon, centering on Jesus, magnifying Jesus, was the one who denied Jesus. Just 7 weeks before, in a courtyard, when the pressure came on, he just capitulates and denies Jesus. How things had changed. A new Peter emerges and grows in stature as a leader. And one day, one sermon, 3,000 people respond. That's amazing, isn't it? I guess we have some leaders who preach 3,000 sermons and then one respond. But here's Peter preaching one sermon and 3,000 people respond to it. What an ingathering. I mean, Jesus did say, I will make you a fisher of men. And here it is. He's drawing in the net. He's delivering the word. He draws in the net. 3,000 people. Imagine those 3,000 people going back to various places where they came from. Different, changed, sharing with their family how they came to Jerusalem. And they listened to the gospel, and God spoke to them, and God challenged them, and God changed their heart. And so, 3,000 on the ground, but a lot more, I'm sure, when they go back to share with their friends and family. So the new Peter has arrived. Just gives a little miniature talk in chapter 1, but chapter 2, he really goes for it. Puts down a marker that he is God's man. He is the apostle that God has called him to be. And we see this great ingathering of souls. So we continue the next time going through some of the incidents with Peter in the book of Acts and seeing how powerfully God uses him in the supernatural. So the Lord bless you. Thank you for joining, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.